is the TTS Talking Early Years podcast, and I am Alice Sharp, your host for today. And today, joining us, sharing her practice, her thoughts, her inspirations, is Mariana Carazo, a play-based learning advocate. I am delighted to introduce you to Mariana. Welcome to the podcast, Mariana. How are you today?
Hi, thank you so much, Alice. It's a pleasure to be here on board. I'm beyond thrilled to be able to share my experience and hope that many other educators can actually join this ride of play.
So we've talked about play, we've thought about play. When thinking about this play that we're talking about, I know many feel that free play, intrinsically motivated, authentic is a word that I hear bandied about. Fairy dust teaching, in fact, which is a US based methodology, it talks about authentic play, should be the only solution. However, I do love the fact that play brings huge benefits, learning possibilities. And I'm thinking about one of my favourite things to observe, which you talked about a minute ago, Mariana, is to observe children moving through the progression of play and learning, to explore with an object. And then as they explore it using all of their senses, they start to experiment. They think, what can I do with it? Where can I take it? What could I add to it? Where, what will happen if I do this with it? And through that exploration and experimentation, they start to practice lots of skills. It might be, as you said, trajectory schema or enclosure schema or whatever they are deeply and utterly engaged in, wallowing in the play. And through that practicing of skills, they start to imitate life experience. And then eventually they'll get to creating an outcome, a product or a conversation or whatever the kind of outcome and the creation is. So I wonder, what do you feel then about how important that at the heart of any learning opportunity we offer is play?
I absolutely love that you quoted Sally Hoey. She's one
She's
of
fab.
she's brilliant. I absolutely love her work. And she is actually a mentor for many. Um, Her point of view aligns with development and how we actually have to, what I mentioned before, observe what the child is doing, and that will actually evolve into a an amazing learning opportunity. When I first started teaching through play, one of my biggest fears, Alice, was I thought that I had to observe every single thing and then just merge all the standards into that thing and make it a playful experience. I'm like, how am I going to cover the entire curriculum like this? I won't be able to make it happen. And I have to say, this was one of my biggest struggles until I discovered what we were talking about, that there's a lot of things that will happen that way, that will be presented by the child, but there will be a majority of skills that we will have to present to children. There are ways of saying that children, in the first 6 years, we want them to explore and we want them to observe and we want them to have inquiry about the world, which I completely agree. But I've noticed that also there's a motivation that can come from the educator when we facilitate activities, especially let's think about all the learning areas: math, writing, reading, science, language, and how we actually open the door to that learning. I do have to advocate for hands on learning. I think that hands on learning is the motor to play, because if you have, and if you know, once again, I'm being like emphasizing on the standards, because I think that one of the biggest treasures that you have is knowing how the standard looks like. If you want to know how to teach math, let's start with number sense. Let's start with all what that actually means. What does it mean? What do we want the child to use it for?
And
Use it.
yeah, and so when you're referring to the standards, we would not call them that in the UK and certainly around the world. So I know you've got Florida standards because we're actually working with them here because Paola is doing our Adventures with Alice program, so that's brilliant. And so for the listeners in the UK or in New Zealand or Australia, they are really the statements of the early years foundation stage would be England, our curriculum for excellence in Scotland, the Te Whare Key in New Zealand. So we all have standards. We just don't call them standards. So you're absolutely beautifully articulating number, for instance, about number sense. So we might be thinking about stable order or one-to-one correspondence or cardinality of number, abstraction of number, the how of counting. And then we would move on to the what of counting, which would be order and relevance, subitizing, comparison, counting. We're all involved in the same thing. We just use different terminology. So it's really interesting to hear you reflect on that, because I think you're absolutely right, Mariana, that the standards are there as a guideline for us. We don't have to work through them like tick, 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 but they're there to support us, as Vygotsky would have said, to help us scaffold our thinking in order for us to scaffold the children's thinking. And so how do you practically encourage the dispositions and skills for play through that maths or science or whatever sort of standard you're looking at? How do you do
I
that?
think that the secret here is I call powerful presentations or activities is when I merge more than one benchmark standard or however you would call it
Yeah,
into, like, let's say, like a package.
yeah,
I like to see like a progression within what I want to teach. So I know that I start here and I end here. And I will take the students into a journey of learning. So it might happen that I observe children in open ended play counting objects, and I will sit down and have a conversation. But I will also have a small presentation in which I teach children about number sense, about cardinality, about subitizing, using hands on manipulatives. And there are many that are free. There's all
yeah,
sort of materials, loose parts around the world that we can use to engage children. So if I know, for instance, that there's a child or a group of children who absolutely love positioning, wow, let's start playing with cars and let's talk about these standards while we play with the cars, or in a presentation using the cars in parking lots. Or it's about creativity, and we will actually talk about 21st century skills and how you need them, not only to be developed in children, but as an educator. Because our job is not to recite these standards or benchmarks. Our job is to make them meaningful to children.
yeah.
And that we can only achieve through playful learning experiences. When
And
I always like telling teachers, if you are going to create an activity, think about, why am I doing this? What am I addressing? And is it worth it? Is it worth my time? Am I going to get the best out of it? And if you can answer those three questions with effective responses, by all means, go ahead.
yeah.
Sometimes we do activities just to fill the time, and at the end of the day, they're not adding anything into our programs.
And I think when you were talking about the maths and positioning, and you talked about the car lot, I watched one of your Instagram videos, and it was you were standing and you threw a roll of tape over your shoulder, and it landed on a black mat, and then it was mapped out, and you had little parking lots, and it's just such a simple. And I think often what I loved about your video is you told us the why behind it. Whereas if I saw that on Pinterest and copied it, I as an educator I might not think, why am I doing this? And
Correct.
I think that the link that you did for me in that little video that I watched of you was you made me realise the why. And I think that's one of the things that I worry about, that a lot of us as educators, because it's a hard job we do, we're drowning sometimes with the pressures of it, and sometimes we overcomplicate it for ourselves. I'm thinking of block play. You mentioned block play earlier on, or pizza boxes to build the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or big catalogues to build the Great Wall of China, or whatever we're doing in the construction area. And my children are hypothesizing, they're predicting, they're making decisions, they're making choices, they're finding the materials they need, they're inventing ways of using those materials, they're designing a car lot or a wall, or a tower. And there's such higher order thinking going on there, that as you started and you said you wouldn't want just one standard to be your aim, you want four or five standards to be the aim. And so what else is it that as educators we can do for ourselves to make us better at noticing the learning that comes out of the play?
I think that it is key to collaborate. If you work with more um, teachers in your school, collaboration is key because more brains together will have better ideas. I
Yeah,
think that if we collaborate as human beings, and especially as educators, we will move mountains because it's less work. We tend to do everything ourselves.
we
Teachers
do.
try to do everything by themselves, and that's exhausting. I think that we burn out super fast because we try to do everything 100% perfect
Yeah,
and without help. And I want to emphasize in two things. Simplicity is key. You can still do beautiful activities being simple. And that's one of my biggest goals to share with my audience that you can do fun and engaging and amazing activities being simple. Of course, once in a while, if you want to do an amazing provocation with a lot of materials, that's fine. It will come from your heart. But if you feel that pressure of doing amazing, complicated activities every day, it won't work. You will end up exhausted. So that's number one. And number two, if you have a team, work around your team, collaborate. Let's brainstorm all the math for the month. I love to plan, not on a weekly basis, because I think that if we plan monthly or even for 6 weeks, you can see the progression of this learning, where you want to start and where you want to end. I think this comes from my curriculum development because I think that if you just emphasize on a skill by skill base, it's exhausting too. It's exhausting and it's harder to see what you want to achieve. If
yeah,
you see the larger chunk and you see, okay, this is where I'm starting and this is what we are where we are ending. As a team, what can we plan to make this progression and to move children into these learning outcomes, actually enjoying it and doing it in a meaningful way. So collaboration is key, seeing the big picture is key, and not overdoing it. And I think that nowadays it's hard because we have so much on social media and we see all these amazing activities, but I'm a mom of three. I run a school out of my garage. I don't have the time
hi.
to be complicating myself
Yeah.
into these outcomes because it won't last. It won't last. So, and
And
I think that I still make it happen in a very simple, engaging, and fun
yeah,
way.
and I love the way that you talked about the planning there. That as an overview, because again, the inspectors and put pressure on educators, and we're not encouraged to plan in advance. We're in the moment planning or reflective and responsive planning, and so we would not have as much of a kind of 6 week plan or a 4 week plan to see where the children were going to go. We're dissuaded from doing that to a certain extent, but you described it beautifully as an overview, because you have to have an overview. You have to know what skills and knowledge your children need to go to that next level. And so if you don't plan in any shape or form or have that overview, then you're going to fail in some aspects of learning, I think. And so it's lovely to listen to you talking about that bigger picture. And I think that's really important that we take that into our play and forward in our play, so that we have some kind of lens to look at how the children are progressing. Because if we lose sight of that, how do we encourage them to progress properly?
And Alice, it's not only about the children. The educators are the motor to this process. And it is exhausting if you plan skill based and
Yeah,
one day at a time and week at a time. You want to make it effective. And actually, one of my biggest goals is to teach educators how to, when I say that I plan an hour a week, nobody believes me. And I do because I know what I'm teaching and I know that I want to make it work. I already have my system. I already have a schedule of how many activities I need per week. And one of the biggest things I discovered when I started this journey is that I was over planning and that I was overdoing. So I do think that educators, if if we want to be happy, children, if we are happy, children are happy. And we want to make it doable, and we might want to make it easy on ourselves. Otherwise, we will end up exhausting after the first year of teaching, and that's not what we want.
Hugely. And I think also the dispositions of our children, that we need to recognise that some children love to do creative play, some love to do fantasy play, some love to be deeply engaged in maths and science, and other ones love to just listen to stories. And
Yeah.
so are you seeing a child being adventurous? Are you seeing them being diplomatic? Are you seeing them being motivated to go or hesitant to go to an area? And we can use that overview to say, well, actually, I've noticed that that child is avoiding any way of getting messy, and they're therefore not benefiting from those 10 activities that have been available, and inviting them in. And we can do something about that as an adult. And I think sometimes we miss that if we don't have that overview.
I completely agree. I completely
Yeah.
agree. The big picture is key into a successful learning journey.
And so play based learning then seems to be the answer to the road into critical thinking, creative thinking, the curiosity of the child being ignited, and it's to do with the adult, definitely the way you've shared that with me, being that big resource. That it's really important that we know what we're doing, we know what we're thinking about, and we know what our intentions are for learning to take place in our facilities. Yeah. Well, oh my goodness me, that has just been a joy and an honour and a privilege to share time with you today, Mariana. I cannot thank you enough for joining us on our podcast today. So all it leaves me to say is a huge thank you on behalf of everybody that's tuning in, to you for being with us and for sharing all of that fabulous insight into how play can really make a difference and make an impact for our children.